name is Sarah, and today I am jumping in with the monthly recommendations group that was started by Trina from Between Chapters and Kayla Rain. I will link all of the info for both of their channels and the Goodreads group in the description below if you would like to join us. Every single month we choose a topic and share our recommendations on it, and in the month of June we are sharing books from around the world. For my particular interpretation of this, I decided to share with you guys a grand total of 9 books, 8 of which take place on the major continents throughout the world, though I did decide to split out the United Kingdom and Europe because I have read a lot of literature that takes place in those 2 locations, and so I wanted to give you a recommendation from each of those, even though they're technically both on the European continent. And then I also have a 9th bonus book that takes place in a ton of different locations and just made me want to go to all of the places. Up first, starting in non-US North America, we have the Anne of Green Gables series by L.M. Montgomery. If you are not familiar with it, this is an 8-book middle grade series that follows a red-headed orphan named Anne Shirley. And when she is 11 years old, Anne is mistakenly adopted by a brother-sister, old maid, bachelor couple, and they decide to keep her, and the story just sort of starts from there and follows pretty much the entirety of her life through schooling and college and getting married and having children, and you just get to watch Anne grow up. Anne Shirley is my favorite character in all of literature. She is vivacious and spunky and has a bit of a temper and is just a wonderful and delightful person to read about. And so even though these stories are not really plot heavy, there's very much just a lot of things happening with characters. They're just a wonderful, wonderful read, and Anne is just such an interesting and hilarious person to read about. And so if you have not checked out these books yet, I would highly recommend it. The entire series takes place on Prince Edward Island in Canada. Heading down to South America, we have A Swiftly Tilting Planet by Madeleine. This is the 3rd book in the Time Quintet, which is a 5-book middle grade fantasy / magical realism series, depending on the book in the series. Some of them lean a bit more toward fantasy and some lean a bit more toward magical realism, and this 3rd book leans more on the magical realism side. In it, we follow Charles Wallace, the youngest child in the Murray family, and one day around Thanksgiving, Charles Wallace's dad gets a phone call from the president saying that a man named Mad Dog Branzello is threatening nuclear war, and Charles is charged with changing the might have been to go back to all sorts of different situations that have led up to this particular event in time and to find the thing that needs to be changed in order to prevent this nuclear war from happening. And though part of this book does take place in the United States, a good chunk of it also happens in South America. Jumping across the pond to the United Kingdom, we have the Cormoran Strike series by Robert Galbraith, aka J.K. Rowling. The Cuckoo's Calling is the first book in this set of detective novels that follows a man named Cormoran Strike, who is a disabled veteran turned private investigator, and they are definitely intriguing and interesting mysteries, but the thing that makes this series so strong is the character development of Cormoran and his assistant Robin, and I just loved reading about the 2 of them in the first 2 books in the series that I've picked up thus far. There are currently 3 books in the series out. The first one is The Cuckoo's Calling, the second is The Silkworm, and the third is Career of Evil, and I believe the 4th book in the series is expected sometime this year. The entire series takes place in England, primarily in and around London. Jumping on over to the rest of Europe, we have The Nightingale by Kristin Hannah. This is an adult World War II historical fiction novel that follows 2 sisters living in France during the German occupation of World War II, and they become estranged as they hold very different opinions about how France should respond to the German occupation. One sister joins the French resistance and the other sister decides to stay in her home and try to live life as normally as possible. I read this back in the month of April, and it is my favorite read of the year so far. It is an incredibly moving story with beautiful writing, fantastic characters, and so many wonderful themes and questions for someone to ponder as they are encountering this story. I have already done a full video review on it, which I will link in the card symbol above and the description below if you would like to hear more thoughts, but I could not recommend this book highly enough. As I previously mentioned, it takes place in France. Heading down to Africa, we have Ingen by Rachel Caine. This is the first book in the Great Library series, which is a YA dystopian sort of alternate history series in which the Library of Alexandria was never destroyed and has turned into a dictatorial superpower that controls all access to knowledge. Our main character, Jess Brightwell, is from London, England, but very shortly into the story, as he enters training to go into service to the library, he travels to the city of Alexandria to receive most of his training, and so a good chunk of this book does take place in and around that area, and it is just a really, really fun story. The characters are great, the world building is fantastic. I loved all the twists and the turns and the relationships that are formed, and a lot of the philosophical questions and ideas that the book poses about access to knowledge and things like that. And this is another one that I have already done a full video review on, which I will link again in the card symbol above and the description below if you would like to hear more thoughts. But this is another favorite from this year so far, and I highly, highly recommend you pick this one up soon. The second book in the series, Paper and Fire, comes out on July 5th. Heading east to Asia, but also popping back to Europe and Africa, we have the Lunar Chronicles series by Marissa Meyer. If you are not familiar with it, this is a 4-book YA science fiction series that is retellings of popular fairy tales. The first book, Cinder, follows Cinderella, and the remaining books in the series are retellings of Red Riding Hood, Rapunzel, and Snow White, and it is just a fantastic and wonderful series. This first book in the series takes place in New Beijing, in the China that exists in the post-World War IV society that the Lunar Chronicles takes place in, and you get more interaction in New Beijing in the rest of the series, while also hopping over to France and Europe and heading down to Africa and then eventually going out into space. But it's just a really, really fun series with great characters, a lot of twists and turns, and if you are a fan of sci-fi or retellings or fairy tales or sort of any of the above, I highly recommend checking it out. I did individual reviews on all 4 of the main books, which I will link in the description below if you would like to hear more thoughts, but definitely check this series out soon. Heading further south to Australia, we have The Rosie Project by Graham Simpson. This is an adult contemporary novel that follows a man named Don Tillman, who is a professor of genetics at a university in Melbourne. Don is very particular about the way he lives his life and has decided that the one thing he needs to add to it is a wife. But of course he is going to go about it in a very methodical and particular way, so he develops a 16-page questionnaire to find his perfect mate. Enter Rosie Jarman, and things go a little bit unlike Dawn expected. This is just a really fun, happy, feel-good kind of story that you can pick up in the summer and just read pretty quickly. And for my final continent recommendation of the day, heading out to the middle of nowhere to Antarctica, we have Where'd You Go, Bernadette by Maria Semple. This is an adult contemporary novel that follows a 15-year-old girl named Bee and her mother, Bernadette. When Bee wins a family trip to go visit Antarctica, her mother goes into a flurry of activity getting everything ready and then one day just disappears. Bee is then left to sort of pick up the pieces and figure out where on earth her mother went. And so the story is told through emails and documents and letters and the like, as Bee tries to piece together the events leading up to her mother's disappearance and where she might have gone. It's just a really fun, delightful story that is about mother-daughter dynamics, loving your imperfect parents well, about families coming to terms with who they are, and it's just a really, really fun story. And though Bee and her family does live, I believe it is in Seattle, obviously, she wins a trip to Antarctica, and so eventually they head out there. And my final wanderlusty recommendation for the day is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is an adult standalone fantasy novel that follows, as you might have guessed, a traveling night circus. This night circus also happens to function as the venue for a fierce competition between 2 magicians, and it is absolutely wonderful. I picked this book up back in February and totally fell in love with it. The writing is beautiful, the characters are wonderful, the story is a bit slow paced in the beginning, but still really compelling and interesting, and you go all over the place in this book. I think I counted it up, and there's something like 12 or 13 different locations that you hit throughout the story, including places in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Europe, I think even some in Africa. You just sort of go all over the place as the story progresses, and the circus itself travels from place to place. And so if you are in the mood for a fantasy that is just engrossing and delightful and gives you so much like sensory description and beautiful lush words and stuff, and also makes you want to go to all the places, definitely check this one out soon. I have already done a full video review on it, which I will link in the card symbol above and the description below if you would like to hear more thoughts. Well, there you have it, friends. Those are my recommendations from around the world. If you have read any of these books, I would love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know in the comments below. And if you have some more recommendations for Asia, Australia, and South America, I would love to hear your thoughts, because as I was going through books trying to pick some recommendations for this, I realized that I have not read very many stories that take place in those parts of the world. If you want to follow me elsewhere online, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Goodreads, all at Sarah Ann Hayes. The links for those profiles will be in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye! Your particular place of living. I will link all of the info for both of your...